Hello and welcome to Glory Be, interesting people and how they pray.
Each week we chat with interesting people about their lives, their work, and how they pray. I'm Sharon Hanish.
And I'm Mike Malcolm. Our guest today is Father Jack Gleason, pastor of St. Bernard of Clairvaux parish here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Father Jack grew up in Blackwell, Oklahoma, with his three siblings. He was ordained to the priesthood for the Diocese of Tulsa in 1995. Since then, he has served as the Vocation Director for the Diocese of Tulsa. He's been the chaplain at the Newman Center at the University of Tulsa, pastor of the Church of the Madalene and the Church of St. Mary, both in Tulsa, before his current assignment as pastor of St. Bernard's. Father Jack is an avid Oklahoma State University fan. Go Cowboys! When he graduated there with a degree in psychology, he worked in student services at OSU for 3 years before entering the seminary. Father Jack did pre-theology studies at Conception Seminary in Northwest Missouri, received his STB in theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and his STL in dogma and sacramental theology from San Anselmo, also in Rome. Those are a lot of initials that you've got behind your name. So you're a vicar, so you're very reverend, and then you've got STB and STL.
Yeah, it means nothing.
It means a lot of work, a lot of papers you wrote, right?
There was a lot of work that went into it. Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. And really, I enjoyed my time there.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity to kind of deep dive in things. So
What is the difference? So is that a European degree? What?
yes, so a European degree, and really, so the licentiate, licenza, it's preparatory to the doctorate. So basically, if you have an STL, you could basically do kind of a class for your doctorate, maybe one or two of the classes, and then you just have to, you've written already one chapter for your doctoral thesis. You would just really need to add two more chapters.
Is the STB like a Master's of Divinity?
Well, so kind of more a bachelor's in sacred theology, but yeah, it's just kind of, they don't really align exactly.
Okay.
I mean, it's a little bit more than just an undergraduate degree, but kind of all the preparatory stuff for really specific studies, advanced studies.
Okay. So you grew up in Blackwell. You're a native of Oklahoma.
Correct.
You grew up Catholic. Correct. What were your plans? So you go to Oklahoma State. We, of course, have worked with Father Jack. He was our pastor for many years, and most people who know him know he loves Oklahoma State University. He wears orange shoelaces when they play. Anyway, so you go to Oklahoma State, were you thinking, I'm going to go to Oklahoma State and then I'm going to be a priest?
No. Was not really in my mind.
Yeah.
So tell us about...
Yeah, I think for me, going to OSU, starting out, I was in a fraternity, and as a pledge in a fraternity, you do a lot of, kind of menial tasks around the house cleaning, kind of all that stuff. Sunday evening at 5:00, I could either stay back and clean the bathrooms in the fraternity, or I could go to Mass. I was very faithful.
Yeah.
During that time. But then I got initiated, and I have to say, kind of I was pushing the envelope on things and was not really living out my faith. Didn't, and so I would say I kind of fell away from practice, but I had what I call my reversion. It was my senior year, and I was kind of set to, at the time I was set to go to law school. I already had my roommate, and but I would have to go to OU. So
Boomer sooner.
I'd rather be a priest. Right, yeah. So I went and met with my B-Law professor and was just talking to him and realized I did not want to, I was going to law school for the wrong reason, because I thought, lawyer, that sounds good. And so I stayed at the university, worked there for 3 years, and it was during that time that really I just started plugging in to things. So serving and going to classes and learning more and just growing in my faith and opportunities for daily Mass. And then there reached a point where I just realized that what I was doing there, kind of the service and everything else, I was enjoying more than what I was doing professionally, in my job. And so I went to a seminary visit and found other guys who were just like me, Kind of, they didn't really know. They thought maybe God's calling them to be a priest, but they didn't really know, and they were just open to it. And so I went. I decided I'll go for at least a year. I'll check it out, and here I am.
Yeah.
How many years later? 30?
Well, ordained 28 years, almost 29 years. So, but then, so I was 5 years in Rome and 2 years of pre-theology, so plus 7. Yeah.
So
35.
How old were you when you went to seminary? 25?
So I was, let me see, how old would I have been? I was 26. Yeah, 26.
Yeah.
27. Right.
So you had a little more maturity than the average college student.
Yeah,
pre-theology.
although we men, we tend to.
Yeah, we can revert.
Later in life, you know.
Yeah. But it might have given you a different perspective, being out in the professional world for a little while.
No, I think it did. I mean, I really value that time. And, part of what I was doing, so I was doing a quality control project for the university, but I was also meeting with students. And I remember meeting, and they were talking about kind of their financial problems, all this stuff. So working for a secular university, I could not go into the spiritual stuff that was behind it. Yeah. And I just remember thinking like, wow, that's where a lot of this stuff is. A lot of things that people are struggling with. And so kind of almost feeling kind of hamstrung and hampered by that. So that was part of the impetus for wanting to be able to really go in and be able to deal with that area.
So fast forward, you've been ordained for almost 30 years now, looking at that. And the diocese, the bishop gave you some time to take a sabbatical.
Yeah.
And I know, just backstory, your plans were to go perhaps for 6 months to India.
So it was always been 3 months.
3 months, okay.
It's always been 3 months. But originally it was going to be to do the Camino in Spain, to go to Santiago, and then to go to India, work with the Missionaries of Charity, and then return home. And just because of my mom's health, I didn't want to be in India like 2 days flight away and something happened to my mom. So I still went to Spain. So it was kind of, there are pilgrimage portions to it, and really portions that related to kind of all my assignments. So I had, so in terms, I was at St. Mary's, both as an associate and as pastor. And so a lot of the Marian shrines. And so, in fact, I started out in Marseille, France, so in the south of France. So there's Notre Dame is kind of the big kind of cathedral that's right there in Marseille. And so that was kind of my starting point. But also in that same city, Sharon and I, we teach in the Sustained Lectio. And so part of what we teach on is St. John Cassian.
Okay,
and so looking at kind of the tradition, kind of the desert tradition, kind of the influences. And so anyway, John Cassian, his body is in Marseille. So that was part of the reason that I wanted to start there. And then I went to, so in Provence, and so I was walking a little bit there. And then I had gone up to the place where Mary Magdalene lived for 30 years, so the cave where she was in, and they built a church around there. And then her basilica is kind of then up and over. And so because I was at the Church of the Madalene for 10 years, so wanted to make that a part of it. So then the Marian Shrine. So Fatima was the new one that I had never been to before, and so I did that. So I started out because I had one of my buddies that I went to seminary with. He was like, well, I'll never go on the Camino probably by myself, so since you're going, so he did 10 days with me. And so originally I was just going to do the entire northern route is what my original plan was.
And can you tell people, we could have listeners who don't know what the Camino is.
Sure. Yeah. So it's an ancient pilgrimage. So kind of the major pilgrimage places for Christendom, it's really the Holy Land, Rome, and then in northern Spain, there's the church of, so Santiago de Compostela, so the Church of St. James. And so the medieval pilgrimages kind of often would go to one of those three places. And so just historically, people have made pilgrimages. And so when you're making a pilgrimage at that point, you're just a traveler. You're on a journey. You're kind of subject to the whims of kind of whatever the weather's going to be that day and kind of where you stay and all of that. And it's really just an opportunity to grow spiritually, and usually you bring some kind of intention on that. So I was originally going to do one kind of this long route, but because my buddy Monsignor Pankey was going with, so we did part of the French way. So we went into Santiago together, and so he was able to get his pilgrimage credentials and certificate. And then I did 9 days on the Primitivo, so it's kind of the oldest, but it's the mountainous, like rugged terrain. It was the worst part of it for me. And then I flew down to Portugal, and then Fatima, and then I did the entire Portuguese Camino.
Okay.
How much walking was that total?
So right around 430 miles is what I ended up walking.
That's impressive.
So
And you took 6 weeks? How long?
Yeah, so 6 weeks, but so I was walking right around 30 days. So it was about 15 miles a day.
Wow.
And did you sleep outside?
No.
I knew you didn't, but I was asking. Yeah,
I know.
So you would walk how much per day?
So
15?
The average is 15 miles a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so some days would be less, 11 miles. Some days would be 18, 19. I think the longest I walked was maybe 22 miles, right around there.
It's a lot.
Yeah. It was a lot. I got blisters.
Yeah.
But that's part of the experience. And actually it was one of the things that I learned from the Camino. I remember when I was first starting out, I'm fresh, so I'm like, kind of walking.
Did you carry a backpack?
I carried a backpack.
Okay.
But I also slack packed too.
That's what I was wondering.
So I did have another bag and there's a service that they would go to the next place and they would take that. I would just do my day pack.
Okay.
So it wasn't like camping.
Right.
But I remember I'd be passing some people, and interiorly I'd kind of be thinking like, they'd be kind of gimping along, and I'd think like, should have trained a little bit more. That's what I was thinking, and then after I got my blisters, and then I'm the one gimping along, and people are passing me. I was like, okay,
God, what they're thinking.
I get it.
Yeah.
I understand. We can't judge there. We don't know.
That didn't take long for that to come full circle. Yeah.
Well, and because we've talked, I want to ask you about a traveler that you met along the way towards the end. Yeah, I'd love for you to share that story with our listeners.
Yeah, so he was a young man, probably right around 35, somewhere around there. So I'd seen him at breakfast. So I had 10 days with my buddy, but then the rest of the time I was by myself. And I say by myself, just whomever I met along the way. That's who I walked with. And so I got to meet all these people from all over the world. And so this young man, he was from Denmark and agnostic. He said at first atheist, and then he said agnostic. But I was just walking in. Of course, I'm in shorts and T-shirt, not in clerics. And so this first hour, kind of walking with him, and we kind of hit it off. And we were talking about different things. And he was a deep thinker. I appreciated that. And I remember like stopping, and we get to this small little town, and there's a church there. And I said, well, I stop at churches. And I said, so if you want to go on, well, it's been good talking to you, or if not. And he said, no, I'll wait for you. So I went in and prayed, and I came back out. So this happened a couple of times. Then I remember, and then he said, so what do you do when you go in there? I said, well, I pray. And then we started talking about that prayer. And again, he was a deep thinker. And so we were talking philosophy. He loved history. And so the next church that we came to along the way, then he said, is it okay if I go in? I said, no, absolutely. And so I remember going in this church, I think it was the Church of St. Francis. And so I just started using kind of the images and all, this is when St. Francis, when he had his conversion. Yeah. So this conversion moment, kind of talking about that. And then we'd stop for lunch, and then I'd say, I always say a prayer before I eat. Are you okay with that? And he's like, okay. And I'd take off my hat. He'd take off his hat. And so it was just this kind of mutual respect. I just kind of met him where he was. And then we ended up walking 3 days. So he was the person I probably walked with the longest. It wasn't 3 days consecutively, but we hooked up at different times. And so anyway, so he ended up going to the Pilgrim Mass. That once we got to Santiago, and it was a really good experience. And then so he's gone back to Denmark. He's gone to Catholic churches.
Oh wow!
And the first one he went to, he said, it wasn't really my thing. And I said, well, go to a different one. Find one that you like, and talk to the priest. Let him know you went on the Camino, and so anyway, you're just curious. And so it was just kind of this kind of God bringing two people together, and but again, it was a positive impact for me as well. Again, just the beauty of kind of meeting someone exactly where they are, and helping them to take the next step. And again, it was a grace time for me.
Yeah.
I expected, like on the Camino, I thought I was going to meet people like you, super Catholics, and so I was carrying my mass, mass kit with me, and thinking prepared, okay, hey, let's stop, we'll do mass together. Yeah. And I met very few Catholics.
Wow.
Along the way.
I'm surprised.
Some fallen away and had good conversations with, but mostly I would say non-Catholic.
I was very surprised by that too.
Yeah. Well, that was my experience. And so anyway, but it ended up being kind of more evangelization versus like kind of what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like the celebration of Catholic faith together. I got to meet all these people and do mass. Yeah.
Well, for most of those people who are non-Catholic, were they non-believers?
I would say usually there was some kind of spiritual component. This young man from Denmark, for him, he loved to hike. Yeah. And so he hikes all over Europe, and so this was it was a good trail, and but just his openness to the spiritual and kind of exploring.
What was like the hardest part? Like you mentioned the mountains.
Yeah, that was a hard part because that piece of it, I wanted to go to Oviedo, which is the place where this sudarium, which I believe is kind of the cloth that wrapped Jesus' head, is housed there. So, but I didn't want to have to fly up to Oviedo and then kind of walk. So I was actually going against traffic. I mean, like everyone else was walking the other direction. I was going this way. So it was 9 days, and I had blisters, and I was mostly by myself, unless I was in a coffee shop. And I can enjoy kind of contemplative time and stuff, but I was so ready to talk to people. I'd be like, "Hablo inglés?" I was like willing to try and speak to anyone in any language. Right. So that was probably the hardest time. But it ended up kind of in hindsight was probably when the Lord was kind of drawing me deepest, because that's where like going up and down, especially down, like kind of with the blisters on my feet. It was the hardest physically, and then kind of being alone. Right. But I had to rely more on God. It ended up being really grace-filled. Yeah.
So I want to jump because I want to make sure we include this. So you finish there and you go to St. Louis to work with the sisters.
Correct. Yeah, the missionaries of charity there. So Mother Teresa's community.
Yeah. But you just had good stories to tell about that. So talk a little bit about what you did, but I love the story about what the sister said to you when you kind of arrived. Okay, tomorrow this Jesuit didn't show up.
So anyway, so I had worked out kind of being there with the former superior. Well, then they changed, but it was while I was on the Camino. Yeah. So I show up there, and they weren't ready for me to be there. Like, oh no, And so anyway, so then we start. We start in the kitchen. So one of the daily tasks, something that I did every single day, was always help to prepare a meal for the homeless. And so they'd have one person who would cook. Most of the time it was the sisters. And then so the rest of us, there'd be volunteers. We'd chop vegetables, do whatever. And then so it was like that day, she could see I could chop vegetables. And she was like, oh, you can cook? And I said, oh, no, I like to cook. Oh, good. You will cook on Wednesday. I was like, oh, this Wednesday? Yeah. And I said, okay, well, what do you want me to cook? Well, whatever you find. Like, it was just like kind of whatever people donate. Yeah. Like, and so I was like, well, I'm like thinking like, and then they had this old bread and like, so I ended up making stuffing and I had ham and it was just kind of, you just relied on the providence of God. That's what they did. And that was their whole life. It was beautiful. So pretty much, so I was always like helping cook, and most Wednesdays I was like, okay, you're it. And that same week, then she said, "Oh, Father, what are you doing this Saturday?" And I said, well, "Whatever you need me to do. You will give us a 1-hour conference on joyfulness." It's one of their charisms.
Oh my gosh!
So here are these so 8 of them are from India. One was from Mexico. They've been living the charism of joyfulness, and I'm supposed to give an hour-long conference on this charism that they've been living. But God provided and. It was really beautiful. I told Sharon this. one of the things I learned, I like to start Mass on time. It drives me crazy. We have someone I used to work with, she said, Father Jack's anatomically correct clocks. I was like, oh, you mean atomically correct?
Yeah.
So, because I like to start right on time. So
Right.
I remember it was like that in that first week, and I said, what time is like daytime prayer? Because I was going to pray with them. She said, around 11:45.
Yeah.
Of course, me. So 11:43, I go to the chapel, and I'm sitting there. I'm by myself. 11:45, 11:47.
Oh, gosh.
11:49. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, like a bell rings, and then they all come in. And again, it was just. Now, they would always start Mass right on time, but anything that was just kind of for their community, it was when the Spirit rang the bell, then that's when you went. And so for me, kind of having to let go of like being in control, and realizing like, okay, just God's providence, whatever is asking me, that's what I'm going to do. And just no meetings, no emails. And so just like all these homeless, I got to know by name.
Yeah.
And so in fact, I'd see him like as I'd be driving along, like roll down my window, hey, Valentine, what's up? Hey? And they'd see me, hey, Father.
Right.
It was just really beautiful, just, so I would say kind of a heart for the poor and just kind of like the challenges and really kind of where they're finding God and where it's hard. And
was it dangerous?
Well, there's one, like I remember probably the roughest housing project that I've ever been to. So we had pulled up, we were in 3 vehicles, and we had all these boxes loaded with staples of like cooking oil and 5 pounds of flour and 5 pounds of cornmeal and kind of all these staples that we're going to give to these families that the sisters knew. I remember pulling up there, and so I'm in my clerics and the sisters, and there's one other guy who's in a different vehicle. So I'm by myself because I've got all this stuff loaded, and pulling up, and I see these gang members out there, and so immediately my stomach I was like, well, what am I going to do if they get aggressive with these sisters? I'm kind of thinking like, well, I would need to, and so get out, and I remember like my door slamming, and so like when kind of looking up over, and they see the sisters, and then they're like, hola, monitas.
Wow.
It's like, and I realized like, no, I wasn't protecting them.
Yeah.
Like I was safe because I was with them.
They were protecting you. Yeah.
And they even helped like us carry boxes and, but again, it was just beautiful, and just the power of their lived witness. It inspired me.
Yeah.
Because people responded because they knew, hey, these women, these religious, they care for us.
Yeah.
And they're living in our midst, and they're willing to do whatever they can.
A great disarming presence. That is, how powerful is that to be that beacon, to be instantly recognized? Oh, all the bumpers go down. Yeah. That's great.
It's just so inspiring to hear about it, and what a privilege you got to do that, to take 3 months and to, I've always, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we always ask people about their prayer life. I've always admired your prayer life, your spirituality, your peace, and the way you approach life. If you'll just talk sort of about how has prayer changed for you over the years? Well, how do you like to pray? I was thinking you've been influenced by the Benedictines, at Conception and San Anselmo, the Jesuits at the Gregorian. You were involved.
I've overcome that influence.
No. He's just joking,
I'm just
everyone.
Joking. Francis, I'm just joking.
The charismatic renewal, you were a little bit involved in that. I mean, you've just all different kinds of prayers seem to draw your heart, even Ignatian contemplation. Tell us how do you pray today?
Yeah, I remember when I first came back and was first assigned at St. Mary's as an associate, and I went from like in the seminary, I could do my holy hour and I could just pray about whatever I wanted to pray about.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I'm having to preach every day. And like my prayer time kind of turned functional. Like, okay, I'm like praying over this because I have to say something about this. And, and I remember that being a hard time, kind of having to make that transition. But I would say, for me, kind of just my general, like kind of one of my buddies, kind of the first thing that he does, and not that he told anyone this, but we were on vacation together and someone saw him do it. He wakes up, he gets out of his bed and gets on his knees. It's the first thing he does. And I remember being inspired by that. Like, I need more time on my knees because I know I need God,
Yeah.
And so it's kind of intercessory time, like for, kind of praying for, kind of people in my life that I promised to pray for, and people that I want to pray for, and the communities. I mean, like, every single day I pray for St. Bernard's, I pray for St. Mary's, I pray for the Madalene, because it's just the people who have influenced me and that I want to pray for, and pray for the bishop, and so there's always intercessory time. And then with the liturgy of the hours, so I do my invitatory right there. And it's I just know it by memory, Lord, open my lips, and so I start there, and then even when I'm in the shower, like I do the Hallow app, like some things. So I've been doing 40 days, kind of. So I'll put that on. It's like, because I can hear it. Like, of course, it's kind of blaring in there. Luckily, I live kind of on one side of the rectory. So
and we'll put a link in the show notes to the Hallow app. For
absolutely.
Yeah.
So in fact, I mean, it's like from that app, like on the 40 days for Lent, kind of they talked about Father Walter Chisak, and so I had never read anything that he wrote. He was a prisoner in Russia.
Was he a Jesuit?
Jesuit. Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. Yeah. 5 years in solitary confinement, 15 years in a gulag.
Yeah.
Kind of, just a work camp. So that's like, I ordered his book, and that's kind of my spiritual reading for Lent. And so there's always, and then like, there's always like, for me, kind of liturgy of the hours. So just those pivotal moments, morning prayer, evening prayer, but even like daytime prayer. So right before I came over here, I had a marriage prep. It went like 12:36, and then I had planned on like trying to go to the hospital before I came over here to do this, and then that wasn't going to work. So I went up at 8, and I was like, I've done daytime prayer. So I did daytime prayer, but it just made me stop, and so I so appreciate kind of the liturgy of the hours, praying that. So it's become just part of like the Psalms, and even kind of, some of the canticles from it, and Philippians, and like I get excited. Though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not name equality with God, like Jesus Christ is Lord. And I kind of I'm a nerd when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Okay.
You found a good calling.
Yes.
Well, I've always admired priests balancing their own spiritual needs and the spiritual needs of their flock, and so you can be praying evening prayer like you're bound to do. But you get a call, hey, somebody's in the hospital, you need to come anoint the person. So obviously that interrupts your evening prayer. How do you come back and feed your own soul?
Yeah. I would say for me personally, like Lectio, and especially sustained Lectio. So Lectio, I mean, that's Lectio Divina, so divine reading. So most of the time it's scripture. So for me, kind of daily, like that's what I do. The night before that I'm going to preach the next morning at daily mass, I read through the readings, and I just notice what draws my heart's attention. So I just kind of reflect with that for a little bit. And the next morning, kind of, I've already reflected with a little bit, and then I'll go back to it and then kind of notice and kind of ask the Lord what he wants me. And so usually what he's saying to me is what I end up preaching on, and so people would be like, oh my gosh, you spoke, exactly what I need to hear. And I was like, well, it's actually what God, I needed to hear, And then sustained Lectio, it's really taking a text and just going really deep with it. The most recent one, it can come from Scripture, it can come from our lived experience, it can come from the world around us. This one has been from my lived experience. Actually, it was someone in confession, and he said this phrase, "The aim of my ache is joy," and it just struck me. And so like he left, and I didn't put the green light on for a second. I got something, and I wrote it down, the aim, and I've been praying with that, and you pray with it on the literal level, like the aim, kind of, you think of, a target or kind of a goal, a purpose, the aim of my ache, kind of, there can be physical, there can be mental, it can be emotional. You take it on the literal level, is joy. Okay, well, joy is like, it's not just on the surface, children have this, incredible delight at just being able to enter in, but then something even deeper, that God can do with that. So you pray with it on the literal level, and then it's like on the symbolic level. And then it's like, then you pray with it like, okay, well, and what does this text say to me? Kind of on the moral level, and kind of, for me, I think the Lord kind of inviting me, to, okay, these aches that come in the spiritual life. And it's not really, a door that you have to kind of go around. It's like it becomes like something like through that God can do something really powerful. Mm-hmm. So I think God's speaking to me in that way, and so energizing me, reviving me.
But the benefit, it's interesting how the benefit of your spiritual needs and the needs of your parish, they feed into each other, and one benefits the other, and vice versa. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we are just about out of time. And so one of the questions we ask all our guests, including that you probably asked when you were a host for Glory Be, is if you could invite the whole world to join you in a prayer intention. What would that be?
Just right now, like for me, kind of as I look at our country, I just think spiritual renewal in our country, because I just think like kind of just such divisiveness. And really, I think if we could just move a little bit beyond ourselves, to something the more, in this case, the divine, and allow God in, God could do something with that. So for me, I think it's definitely very intentionally praying for spiritual renewal in our country. Yeah.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Well, I could join you in that prayer intention. Would you lead us in a Glory Be?
Sure, absolutely. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Father, Son,
outstanding.
Father Jack, thank you.
Just
great, thank you.
Inspiring.
Good to be here.
Glory Be is a production of the Office of Communications at the Church of St. Mary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your producer, Mike Malcolm. See you next time.